Good afternoon. This is the control room here in Toronto, where viewers in Canada will see our world this afternoon. It's one of 45 control rooms around the world, linking the world, or the developed world, in this first global television program. I have with me in the control room here Professor Marshall McLuhan, the so-called prophet of this electronic communications age. I hope you don't object to that word prophet. You must be tired of it.
I'm quite helpless.
I don't know if you know what's going on around here, Professor McLuhan. I don't.
It's a real humming, buzzing confusion.
Can you say what message the medium has around the world this afternoon?
Well, I can say right off, for example, that everyone will look at this program as if it were something they had already seen before, with just a little addition of this or that. Because that is the inevitable way in which we look at everything. It's the same old thing with a little item or two added. This, in fact, what is happening today around the world is what has happened at Expo. A huge mosaic has been created, which is in effect a kind of X-ray of world cultures. Not a storyline, not a perspective, not a point of view, but a kind of X-ray through this mosaic is created in which everybody can participate. Everybody is surprised at Expo at how deeply they appreciate and participate in the show. Nobody seems to realize why it is so unlike other world fairs. And I think this show this afternoon will have some unexpected repercussions in that way. People will be drawn into it as participants, whereas they're merely viewing themselves as spectators at the moment.
Doesn't this, though, while it's creating an entirely new intellectual climate, spiritual climate for those who can communicate, doesn't it present another problem, though, of dividing those who can from those who can't?
Well, what is called, for example, a generation gap today. The TV generation of kids have a completely different set of perceptions from their parents. The parents grew up in a visual world, the world of, in effect, of movies, where they had cameras and pictures and points of view. The kids have grown up in an X-ray world. The TV camera does a perpetual job of X-ray on them, and they take this for granted. X-ray means depth. X-ray means participation in depth in whatever they're doing, and calls for a totally new kind of commitment to everything they're doing. That's why, when they encounter situations in which they are merely classified entities, as in the schoolroom, they don't feel wanted, they don't feel needed, they just drop out. Now, this strange new all-at-once situation in which everybody experiences everything all at once creates this kind of X-ray mosaic of involvement and participation for which people are just not prepared. They have lived through centuries of detachment, of non-involvement. Suddenly they're involved. So it's a big surprise. And for many people, a kind of exhilaration. Wonderful.
But there are people in the world, the majority, who don't live in this new, involved society, and they're still in the age of the camel.
You think they're trying to live in the rearview mirror. They're still desperately trying to get an image of themselves in a situation that is familiar and known. Whereas in actual fact, the situation they find themselves in is not well known. It's utterly surprising and terrifying. The people have always, in all ages, Stan, have always been terrified of the present. The only people who seem to have enough gumption or nerve to look right at what's happening under their noses are artists. They're specialists in sensory life, and they just deliberately look at the present, you know, as if they dared it to ruin or do something to them. They're like Perseus and the Gorgon. The artist looks into the mirror of art and says, the heck with the Gorgon's image, I'm not terrified. But most people simply expect, when they look at the present, to be turned to stone, as by the Gorgon's countenance. And they're terrified. Therefore, they prefer the rearview mirror. Nearly everybody who looks ahead, as it were, is in effect looking in the rearview mirror. And if people try to prophesy about today's show, they will be steadfastly looking in the rearview mirror.
But we are, nevertheless, as you have said, those of us who participate in this new society, this electric society, it is a new sense of awareness and involvement. But my question is this: the majority of the world's people, and our satellites are going around the world today, are completely out of it. The cameras don't reach them. They don't hear the message.
They're not watching the show at all.
And they're not in the rearview mirror, they're in the past. Centuries. And isn't that gap widening as our rocket-like society goes forward?
You see, something like Expo, though, creates a mosaic of all those societies as well as all the latest ones. And everything happens at the same moment. You can be in Beirut or in Tokyo or in New York at the same moment in this kind of mosaic world of all at onceness. And so, in effect, the backward countries have to become contemporary simply because of this instantaneous quality of the mosaic. They are all participants. There's no question, it's no longer a question of philanthropy or just do-gooderism. They just realize these people are part of the show and they've got to get into the act. Until we put on their makeup or something, they can't go before the camera. So the whole backward territories of the world are being upgraded very high speed. In fact, one of our most mistaken efforts at upgrading is warfare. Because when you fight a backward country, you, in a sense, educate it to hurry its education up into the present. That's the way Julius Caesar did it.
But didn't we just see an example in the Middle East where one nation had an army which was the complete master of its mechanized society, fighting another which was mentally in the camel age, to some extent.
But you can see that the generation gap there, or the technological gap, created frustration and stalemate at the council tables, even though the war didn't.
Very much so. But you are confident that these nations, the backward nations who are not yet in the electric age, they're in the transistor radio age, as you have already pointed out.
But you see, in our own homes, the generation gap between child and parent is fantastically great. But we always accepted that as a normal, natural growth gap. Now, today, because of enormous speed up of information, the child is becoming an adult. The adult has to acquire all the empathy and intuition of childhood in order to live with his own children. The gap between adult and child is just disappearing overnight. And this is as big a revolution as any backward country has to face when it's being updated into the 20th century. Oh, yeah, the biggest revolutions in the world are taking place under our own roofs, at our own dinner tables. And this all at onceness just wipes out the old distances and times between age groups and between ethnic groups, civilized groups, so on. This kind of speed up enables you, for example, at Expo, to see all the cultures of the world in X-ray form, in depth. What you encounter at Expo is not history, but the immediate experience of these countries. You walk into a pavilion and you experience them not as they were or they will be, but as they are, as an immediate experience, as immediate as the smell of a cigarette.
I'd like to, on this day when Mr. Kosygin and President Johnson are meeting at Glassboro, to look back at a comment you made a number of years ago, about 11 years ago, I think, and you pointed out the difference mentally between a print society and the newer, or to some extent oral society, the electric society. You made the interesting observation that the United States and Soviet Union are the two great countries which came to greatness in the era of the printing press.
No, I'm not sure that I wish to say just that. The United States is entirely a product of the printing press. Russia had many centuries of history before print and still has huge commitments.
But the Soviet Communist Society is a printing press.
Oh, right.
Minded organization.
The 1917, the October Revolution, was entirely the result of the print technology of that era, yeah.
But do you find in those two countries today any indications of perhaps problems that they inherit from the printing press?
Oh, yeah, because the United States is always looking for blueprints and always looking for solutions in forms of classified data. This, of course, is utterly alien to a Russian culture with its oral traditions of involvement. And so there's great gaps, cultural gaps, between the U.S. and Russia. The Russians haven't had time to become completely permeated with print culture by any means.
Did you by any chance see Mr. Baroudi, the delegate from Saudi Arabia, speaking the complete Arab oral man?
No, and a man who resented the coming of the European civilized blueprint into the Arab world, imposing on them. What we consider, that is the way we have always thought of civilization. The giving the benefits of civilization to Africa or anything has always come to any print-oriented people as the laying down of new blueprints, new times for work and education, programming. But today, it has to be done by dialogue, by completely a new kind of involvement and participation in their problems. And this, the old blueprint method is just disappearing with television. Television is an X-ray, not a blueprint. And so it goes right inside problems, inside cultures, in depth. There are so many humorous stories going around today that express the grievances and the tensions that arise from these situations. I wish we had time to rehearse some of them.
Well, I'm afraid that our time is up. I've got to get down to the studio.
Well, thank you.
And many thanks, Professor McLuhan. I think we have to head off around the world.